Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar at one of the busiest times of the year. If you're involved in any way in what we do, which is help people or watch people go to college in the USA. But I'm very pleased to be joined today by two wonderful people, one of whom is Anne Richardson, who is the head of college applications or something similar to that at the American School in London, and Director of Admissions at Rice University in Texas, Alex Alvendia-Wienkers. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining. We're going to play it by ear today, so we're not going to do some big formal presentation. We're not going to have slides. What we are going to do is talk about a few burning topics. Now, as ever, if you've got any questions at all, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box and we will answer them. There are no silly questions, only silly people. So anything you like, put in there. But there are a few things we want to talk about, some general things about what's happening in American admissions, and some more nuanced things and maybe consequential things that I know Anne would like to talk about as well. So I thought let's start off by, Alex, do you want to just introduce yourself a bit and talk about what your role is at Rice, and maybe introduce Rice as well?
Sure. Thank you, Jason, and hi, Anne. Good afternoon for all of you joining us here. My name is Alex Alvendia-Wienkers, as Jason said. I'm the Director of Admission at Rice University. We are located in Houston, Texas. If you're unfamiliar with Rice, we are a Tier 1 research university, kind of on the smaller end of that medium-sized kind of category. We are about an incoming class of around 1,200 first-year students. Each year. Overall, about 4,800 is kind of the target that we have, kind of overall headcount for undergraduate students. And yeah, so in my role at Rice here, I oversee everything from domestic recruitment, international recruitment, the selection process. I was just telling Jason as kind of the pre-chat here that we just started kind of application review. Obviously, November 1st in the United States is quite a big deadline. Rice has a early decision deadline, which was also yesterday. So our team is picking up the applications and starting the exciting work of actually reviewing students to our wonderful institutions, and happy to share some insights about what we're seeing kind of a year out now from what it was already a very crazy cycle from the last couple of years in particular. So happy to be here. Thanks, Jason. Thanks,
Alex. Yeah, it does. It definitely feels crazier this year than other years, and I wonder if that's to do with the fact that we feel now, or a lot of people feel now, like we are fully back. But last year it was still a bit up in the air about whether things would be in person or online, and there was a lot of confusion about lots of things to do with admissions. But this year it really feels like everyone's going for it. What do you think, Anne? What are you saying?
Well, I would say absolutely. I think certainly sitting here in London, it feels as if the pandemic was, some sort of alternate reality almost, that we sort of, went into some alternate universe for a couple of years and now we're fully back. But at the same time, I think we're seeing students who are still very much struggling with the loss of 2 years of schooling. Whatever schools were able to do or not to do, these students still suffered loss and gaps, and not only academically, but also socially and emotionally. And so I think the anxiety is heightened, and what that translates into is, when you have anxious students and parents, it translates into more is better, which only increases the anxiety. I think we've also seen that the level of writing in particular has not been necessarily where it was before. We're worried about that as it hits the Rices that are now downloading all these essays and things like that. So I think the anxiety is still there, and may be even heightened than it was during the pandemic when everybody was aware. And I think what we really worry about is that colleges have sort of thought, everything's back to normal, kids are back to normal, let's go.
Yeah, and I'm going to just jump in here and say we're seeing it on our end. One of the things that Rice we have here is a freshman first year kind of composition examination. This is prior to them enrolling at Rice. They do this in this weeks leading up to the start of term. And in my conversations with my colleagues who, kind of our student affairs colleagues, kind of our student success folks, there's an uptick in the number of students who are needing kind of supplemental writing classes from populations of students that are different than I think we would have expected in years past. And so the kind of the eternal question has been, what can we attribute this to? Or can we attribute to this to one singular variable, or is it a mix of factors here? And then, once we understand where we need where the issue is, what do we then do to fix that? And this is not just for students outside the US. I think this is a truly, I mean, we all know this, it's kind of affected the world, but in an uneven sense. And that's the hard part here, is we don't know, even after point of admission, where some of those gaps might exist until they get here. And I guess there's kind of this assumption that they know how to read, how to write, how to do maths. And then we're like, oh, well, we thought we knew that, and we thought the student had that, and that actually turned out a bit different. And this causes a whole stream of downstream impacts, where the student's mental health, if they're failing or they're struggling, only deteriorates. And then that causes more kind of umbrella effects as folks in the university have to intervene to support that student. And so that's been a question a lot of us is, how do we know the student is well prepared for college outside the traditional measures of academic success, outside what we feel has been a comprehensive review? They're still coming to us with with challenges that were unanticipated, and there was nothing in the application that would have led us to believe that was going to be the challenge when they got to campus.
I'm interested in, is it particularly writing that you see this in? Or you mentioned maths as well, Alex, but I'm wondering if it is indeed because of the pandemic that writing level has gone down. What is it particularly about that subject that is difficult?
I'm sorry, but it's not just writing. I mean,
No.
We see it as university advisors because we're looking at their writing. I mean, they've got all these essays to write. We're not looking at math, but there was a study that just came out that showed that math achievement has deteriorated across the US, and I expect across the world, significantly, all the way down into into lower grades, into elementary school. And what I worry about is the fact that during the pandemic, everybody expected this. Now we're sort of with the pandemic in the rearview mirror. Everybody, faculties in at the undergraduate level, as well as admissions offices, may not give that same grace to these students who are going to be affected. You're going to see this coming for the next 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
This is 10 years that we're going to be seeing this. And so, and again, and me, I'm going to bring up testing. I worry too about faculties who are saying, we're seeing these kids, it's because of test optional, so let's bring back those SATs and ACTs so that admissions stops admitting all these, all these kids who are test optional. And the testing has nothing to do with it. And I worry that that's going to be the default fix for these students who have these massive gaps, not just in math and English, but across the board: critical skills, abstract thinking skills, maturity, social, emotional health, all of these things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so Rice is test optional, isn't it, Alex?
Yes, we continue to remain test optional.
And what is the feeling at Rice, or if you're able to say, about whether or not test optional is a long-term thing for you, or whether, like Anne says, you might try and bring back that testing?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question for all of us, kind of in this position as university enrollment leaders, is yes, and the conversations with faculty are definitely being spun up to ask ourselves, and say, again, to my earlier point, what is it? Is it testing? Is it preparation in high school? Is it gaps because of COVID? What are the variables here, and can you pull those out? I think you're right, Anne. I think there is a natural tendency, there's a knee-jerk reaction here, not just in faculty, but I think certainly among admissions offices, to say, well, if that's the one variable that's really that different, from our perspective, right, that's the only thing that we changed in our process. So of course it must be that. And I think you're right. I think an admissions office or an enrollment division that's approaching this with a level of nuance is going to say, well, kind of temper that knee-jerk reaction, right? And really kind of ask ourselves very honestly, can we definitively say, well, of course it's the testing, and that's the thing that we need to retract to do so. So no, I think you're absolutely right. I think, and if offices aren't doing that hard work to make sure that it is in fact the testing, and if a school does it, I mean, I know Rice and other institutions that I've worked at, we've done validity studies to assess the effectiveness of standardized testing. And I think schools that continue to require testing now and into the future are ones that are probably going to be looking at similar studies moving forward. And that's certainly conversations that I think I'm having, and my other colleagues are having around, we just need more data to see how these students are doing. And, we're really only like 2 cycles in worth of students to really effectively say, can we anticipate the success of these students, not just on the first day of classes, not just in terms of their first year, but do they persist? Do they graduate? Do they graduate on time? And how much of that can again be correlated back to standardized testing? And again, like you said, Anna, because of the cyclical nature of this work, this is not stuff that you can do quarterly. This takes a full calendar year for this stuff to really have enough data and robustness for us to be able to definitively and statistically say, yes or no, this is where we can say this is where this isn't having a.
But I guess there's a deeper question here, though, isn't there? Which is, the ethics of standardized testing aside, if students have been struggling on all fronts in their schoolwork as well, it's going to show up when they apply for university on those school grades. And the university is still presented with the same problem, which is, okay, this student doesn't look as strong as they did before, or someone that we would have expected. So do we admit them or do we not? And of course, we're seeing the students with the most resources and the most means being able to get around that and crowding towards those very top universities. I guess the deeper question then is, what is the role of the university? Is the role to try and bring those students up to that level, even if they think they're not being presented with students who are as strong as they want? Or do the top universities just say, well, listen, we're just going to take the ones who are at that level, and it's the job of the other universities to bring them up to scratch? How do we begin to tackle that problem?
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think this is a question that I think this is the conversation between admission and faculty senates here, where we're saying, is it our job to make the difference up in the gaps that the student didn't have before, and how big is that gap? Right. When I think about a student who hasn't had the resources of, let's say, a student who goes to a very well-resourced school, how much can my university in a year's time make up years of either learning loss or under-resourced? And is that fair to expect a university, or is it fair for us to put that pressure on a student to be like, hey, we know you haven't had this much, opportunity, and so, but we have the resources to get you to that point. It just, the time here, right, is, and this is an ethical question. I don't know if there's a good answer to it, but I certainly am cognizant and have asked myself that thing, like, are we doing ourselves a disservice both to the student and the university by expecting us to catch these students and elevate them to be exactly the same as their peers? I don't know.
That's a really interesting question, and I think you just saw that play out at NYU. With the professor who was fired. Yeah, absolutely. Because that do you maintain your benchmarks and just sort of not deal with that level of student, or do you start differentiating because you have a population that across the board to some degree or another has been affected by this? I mean, again, what I think has been happening in elementary and secondary schools is that there has been a massive amount of differentiation. And we have recognized, certainly in my own institution, that we need to do that in order to make sure that students are learning in the way that they can learn best and get to where they need to be. And again, that's not something that universities are necessarily used to doing. And I think you saw that play out at NYU. And to be fair, I mean, I'm making massive generalizations here. I'm sure there are some universities that are incredibly good at doing this, but that is going to be something that faculties are going to have to tackle at the undergraduate level, because these kids are coming. And and there's an article in the New York Times today about pandemic kids on campus who are just struggling to keep up with a curriculum that was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, and for the benefit of our audience, Anne, do you want to explain what happened at NYU recently?
Yes, so at NYU recently, a professor was fired because he was teaching one of those courses that are designed to weed students out, something like an organic chemistry course. And the students complained that he was not responsive to their learning needs. It was a small group of students complained that he was not responsive to their learning needs and the way in which they need to learn. And the university, for all good reasons, I hope, sided with the students and fired the professor.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, we could go down the route of what some European universities do, which is have much lower entries or barriers to entry, and then expect the students to try and keep up while they're there. I'm not always convinced that's the best thing either, for lots of reasons, because like you said, Alex, you get a lot of students who are suddenly way out of their depth and struggling, and that's not good for people's mental health either.
Right, and certainly from an enrollment and admission side, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Rankings matter in the United States as they do around the rest of the world, and our rankings in part are based on persistence of students. And so there's a vested interest in the university in making sure that the students we're admitting are going to persist at the highest rates possible, and not just persist, but also graduate within a reasonable amount of time. So that's the tension here is can we as a university support the student to get them to graduation? And again, the ethical question here, is that our job to do that? And so I don't have a good answer here. I'm just offering insight and just the tensions that I think in our teams we're feeling of like, oh crap, like rankings are a thing. And as much as we may love or hate them in the same way we may love or hate testing, they are a reality of the marketplace. And we have to be cognizant of what decisions we have may impact those types of indicators to the public.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, it's also true that non-US universities teach in a very different way from US universities. The program is different, the expectations of the majors are different, and I suspect that I know that there is a certain level of independence that is an absolute must at non-US universities that is not so necessary at the outset for US universities too. So it's the teaching, that's where, how a course is taught comes into play.
Yeah, and you were referencing earlier the anxiety amongst parents as well, and how that manifests itself in terms of more applications, I think is one thing you said. Do you notice at least some spread within those applications, or are they more of the same kinds of applications?
So I certainly can't speak for anybody else except what we're seeing here at ASL. But certainly at the American School in London, we have seen, we continue to see an uptick in numbers of applications. And what we have noticed in particular here is that the number of applications to non-US universities has increased significantly.
Okay, interesting. And why do you think that is? It's just because people want more chances, or are they genuinely more interested in a wider range?
I think there are a number of factors. One is, I think our demographics have changed a little. We have fewer American families and more international families, families from multiple cultures and backgrounds. I would say that cost is a factor. The cost of university is become, particularly in the current economic downturn, across the globe. The cost is becoming a big issue. I would say too that our students are definitely looking closer to home. There are some, there are definitely some feelings on both the student and the parent and guardian end of things that we'd like them closer to home. And then the other thing is that I, and Jason, perhaps you can speak to this as well. I think the rhetoric and the news that is coming out of the United States makes people a little bit more wary of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, again, we try and tackle these issues more anecdotally, but there were a few things over the last few years which I thought would have a massive impact on people wanting to go to America, and I was surprised that they didn't. One of which was Trump being elected, and I think what pleasantly surprised me was that students, there weren't many students who were particularly big Trump fans, but the students who were going to America, realized that they were more on the periphery and they could go and observe that sort of thing, and in some ways it's quite an exciting political time if you're a neutral. But the thing that I have noticed is that with the recent Supreme Court ruling, that has had more of an effect on female students, particularly female students saying outright they don't want to go to certain states. Because I think they can suddenly see that those things will actually impact them directly and could impact them over the next few years. So that's something that I think has shifted things. In terms of actual application numbers, I don't think it's changed things at all. I mean, we've seen more people than ever want to apply this year to America. And I think part of it, Anne, as you said, is that people are just applying to more places. One of the nice things we've seen, if we can pick some positives, is that students and parents do seem more open to a wider range of colleges in the States. And I think that is partly because all of us have been making a big effort to try and explain just how competitive it is at the top. And it's not a backup. It's extremely unlikely that you will get into those top places, even if you are one of the best students in the world. And that is starting to sink through to people now, and parents realizing, okay, you still get the same sort of people that will make speculative applications, but more and more people are saying, okay, if I'm going to do this seriously, I'm going to apply to a good wide range. And that's actually, it makes the job much nicer that way, because you can be honest with students and they've got a really good chance of getting in somewhere where, yes, they'll be academically challenged, but maybe won't spend their entire time staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning in the library, just trying to keep up and not doing all the other things which supposedly the university cared about. I spoke to a student's dad the other day. I hope he's not on the call. I won't say who it was, but the student did extremely well to get into Berkeley last year. As we all know, very, very tough. I did worry a little bit when he was admitted that he was already pushing himself hard at school to be able to get top academically. And now I hear exactly that. When he's at Berkeley, he hasn't got time to do anything fun. It's like there's no social life, there's no sport that he used to play, no going out, because he's just desperately trying to keep up with everyone there. He's looking at transferring. I said to the dad, if he transfers, he's got to go somewhere where he's going to have a better time. There's no point in transferring somewhere that's going to be just as hard. And that's nothing against the student, really great student, very amazing work ethic, but you got to question, what is the point of you going to university? Is it to be pushed that hard academically? And maybe for some people it is.
I would agree with you. I think that that certainly the students that we have that are looking at the US, we still have a substantial number looking at the US, but they are looking very carefully at where. The location is key, the state is key, and definitely we definitely are seeing students more open to looking at a wider range of schools, and particularly if merit money for international students as well as domestic students is a factor.
Okay, shifting the topic slightly. Alex, we talked a little bit about test optional before. What is the university's current thinking about the change in the SAT that's coming up? It's coming up for international students, so it's not going to impact America quite as much yet. But what is your planning for that, and how are you going to assess those new scores when they come out in January?
Yeah, well, the good news is that there's not, I mean, obviously beyond the process of how they're being administered, the digital versus the paper, I don't anticipate there's going to actually be a terrible amount of change on our end in terms of our view of those scores, the validity of those. I will say, I know College Board has been quite active on the university side to make sure that we as universities feel confident and comfortable that the test remains, the way that their marketing team, described it, a viable and valid test. I'm curious, that it's curious that of course the digital SAT is being rolled out at the same time all these conversations around test optional and going back into things. I mean, I think College Board and ACT, of course, that's a revenue stream for them. So right, so that's where they built their business, and so I think there's a sense of needing to kind of keep that alive. I'm optimistic that it will. I think for all the challenges separate of the ethics behind testing, I think all the logistical challenges that existed with the paper SAT and ACT in years past, my hope is that some of that, the cheating pieces, the integrity issues of certain markets getting access and things like that at different times, and then those answers being shared and whatnot. So I think from that perspective, I think I feel confident that the students that do decide to take the exam, that feel like it's a good use of their time, that we're still going to get a useful benefit out of it from the admission side. And again, I go back to my earlier point here. I think schools that have done their work to assess the usefulness of these examinations will probably continue to do those assessments internally and make sure that that the validity that the College Board says is going to be continuing to be accepted is also kind of the validity we're going to see here on campus as well.
Yeah, I'm also optimistic somewhat about these tests, and when I say that, there's a lot of problems with the current formats of the SAT and ACT, not just the fact that they're on paper. In fact, with the ACT, I think one of the big problems is that it's on computer. But the reason I'm optimistic is because I completely agree with you that College Board is changing the SAT because they're trying to keep themselves relevant. But I do think the changes they're making are going to make the experience nicer for students. And if the students are going to take the test and have to take the test, at least make it a test that's not one of the worst tests you'll ever take on earth. Because at the moment, the current way of doing it and the length of it is a bit of a nightmare. I know, Anne, you administer the ACT in school for students who aren't at ASL. Then they have to go off to some test centre, and if you get extra time on the test, you're going to have to travel across the country to go and take that test. So it's a real nightmare at the moment. But my colleague Dan, who's our academic director, and I are going to do a webinar on this shortly, because we've been putting together a lot of planning for the new digital SAT and our predictions about it. We actually think there's going to be a big shift towards the SAT quite quickly because of how much nicer it's going to be. And what's your thinking?
Well, I think all of that is very true for countries where laptops are plentiful, the bandwidths are wide, and students have access to technological support and excellent internet. What I really worry about with the digital SAT is the countries where that is just not the thing. And the College Board has said that they are going to be able to supply technology for schools. But again, I mean, if you read the chat coming through on social media from countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, places like that, where these things are a real challenge, and getting stuff into the country is a real challenge. I really worry about the digital SAT rollout for the next year, because I can see laptops being stuck in customs for months. I can see schools having to hire technology coordinators to come in on a Saturday morning to administer this test. I mean, it's just complicated, and at least with the ACT, because they're school-based computers, that there's not the whole sort of shipping and customs piece that the College Board seems to feel is gonna work well. But I just think it's going to be rocky for the next year. I really do. And not so much here in lovely London, where all things, run smoothly here. at least on the Wi-Fi end of things, and not so much in other places. But I do worry about countries where that is just not the case. I really do.
I think that's a really good point, and about the access to computers in general. I think on the Wi-Fi front, the College Board have done quite a lot to try and address that in a better way than the ACT is currently, in that the new digital SAT will be done asynchronously. So you just need to be able to have some internet at the beginning and the end. And it doesn't matter how long after the test that is, it's still going to upload everything. So that's a bit of a relief, but it doesn't matter if you don't actually have a laptop. So
well, and if you can't access the internet at the very beginning, at that moment, with the 100 other kids who are trying to access the internet at that moment, I mean, it's just got to be, it's just one more thing for test coordinators to have to really manage carefully. And unlike the paper, it really involves a whole nother set of people in a school for whom testing is not a priority. Yeah,
that's right. And I know that there was one other thing you wanted to talk about, which was about the court cases at Harvard. Do you want to talk about what's been happening there?
Well, before we do that, I want to just say one more thing about the SAT and ACT in response to one of the questions here, which is really that I think the SAT and ACT testing for US colleges continues to be a really nuanced decision that has to be almost done student by student in terms of what tests to take and when to take them and how many times to take them. I foresee situations where students will not need to take them at all. And then I foresee situations where students may need to take them several times. But I think we have just moved away from the one size fits all testing sort of plans. It's not like everybody takes it in blank, blank, and blank. It's really a nuanced plan now, depending on where students are applying.
It definitely is, and it's added a whole nother layer of complexity and confusion. That's the annoying thing. I mean, I think test option was great. It's good that you get the choice, but if a student isn't getting really good advice, it's really difficult to explain to them, you don't have to submit it there. You can delete out of the Common App. You can now submit without it, that sort of thing. And it's very easy to go wrong if people aren't getting good advice there.
Yeah, it is so complicated now in terms of what to submit, where, when. It's just complicated. But anyway, on to the Supreme Court and the current case before it, the Harvard and the UNC cases. And I've been reading for the last couple of days how, the opinion seems to be that using race in admissions is going to, it's going to go by the way. In June, and I'd actually love to know from Alex what you think about this, and whether this is no longer important, or if it is, how universities are going to deal with this.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is a conversation that in the admission circles in particular has been we've been talking about this for 6 months, year and a half, to be quite honest. I honestly, when the previous administration had quite a bit of success moving in a number of very conservative Supreme Court justices, I think we all saw the writing on the wall there, that it was just a matter of time till a cases in this case reached their level where, if that makeup continued to be the same, I think we would find that this in my opinion, very important tool and consideration for universities like the US that have a very, as all of us can appreciate, the historical ramifications of slavery in America and how a lot of that still is unmitigated in some areas of American education and American society. And so I'm a firm believer that the consideration of race and ethnicity among a whole host of considerations is a very important tool that we can leverage, not in every case, not in some cases. Does it allow us as universities to build what we hope are very diverse and inclusive campuses? To not be able to see that, again, not that we're using it in every situation, or to contextualize our review, I think is a disservice not only to ourselves as an institution, but to the student and their journey in their education. So the conversations are happening. I think there's a kind of an assumption that this is not going to be something that admissions offices can use. The question I think right now is, how far down does this limitation go? If you're familiar with some of the backstory here, a lot of the limitations are in the selection of students. They've given most universities some wide latitude in being able to create recruitment practices that can, in some cases, target underrepresented students in American higher education or under kind of historically excluded students in higher education. So the question becomes, how far down does this go? Is it inclusive of our selection? Is it inclusive of how we go out and can recruit students? Is it go down to current practices within an institution that go beyond admissions, and where most of this time this is kind of really being talked about through the evaluation lens? And those are all unanswered questions. I think in the springtime we'll have a better sense of what this will look like. But like I said, this conversation has been ongoing. It's now kind of reached its fever pitch to where we're now actually kind of putting pen to paper to devise processes and practices that get us to still finding ways to create diverse and inclusive classes, with the expectation that race and ethnicity will probably not be a factor that we can use quite as readily or to the same degree we have used previously.
Yeah, it's interesting. Niche just came out with their survey of, I think, 22,000 college students. Of diversity, and I'm quoting from the report, diversity was the top thing that students want in a campus community. A diverse student body was appealing to 42% of respondents, and an additional 37% said that it was a must-have. And the same for even higher percentages for the faculty. So it's definitely something that people are looking for, and certainly in my population, it is definitely something that they are looking for.
Yeah, and I think that's the disappointment that university officials, myself included, are feeling, is that these rulings or these expected rulings are actually incongruent with what the national and social sentiment is currently, like Roe v. Wade, is that this, again, was kind of settled precedent. This is something that we had all been socialized to, that kind of the rug is being pulled out from underneath us in ways that is not in line with what I would say the majority of Americans probably believe is what they want to see in their places of higher learning. That these diverse and inclusive places are incubators for tolerance, for higher learning, in ways that in America and probably around the world we don't see that same level of mixing. And what better place for a place of higher learning to be a place where you can learn from people who look and feel so different than you. That's I mean, in my mind, that's kind of the point of all of this, is to be able to learn from perspectives and experiences beyond just the one that you're familiar with.
Absolutely.
That's a great place to end. And I know that we could keep talking for a very long time about all these topics.
Always.
Just because we've got a few minutes left, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. You can always contact us. Alex put that New York Times article in the chat. Alex, if you want to put your contact details in there for anyone who is interested in Rice, you're very welcome to as well. I think you might need to just make sure that it goes to everyone rather than just the panelists as well.
Oh, I don't actually have that option, Jason. You want to?
Oh, okay. Then I will do it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to put Alex's thing in there, and I'll put that New York Times article in as well. There we go, so everyone can see that. So I think we've got a couple of questions actually. So Lonnie has asked, it's really interesting about NYU. I wondered if you think that applicants should be more cautious in their choices of reach colleges. It's not just that the reach colleges are more selective, but they may also feel more challenging academically due to pandemic learning losses. Well, what do you think?
And I'm gonna let you take that one.
Thank you. I think that it's become very important for students to recognize how they learn best. And it's also become really important for students to really think about what they're interested in pursuing at in higher education. Are they students who are willing to embrace a core curriculum, or are they students who really want to sort of focus right in on a core set of interests and pursue those? Are these students who work better in labs and project-based learning situations, or are these students who thrive in lectures and independent learning, or are these students who absolutely need that sort of discussion-based learning in order to process information? They need to be able to meet with their professor not once a month, but maybe once a week. So I think in light of all this, it really behooves us to try to really help our students understand what they're looking for, what they need in order to be at their best academically as well as socially and emotionally. And then, names and rankings aside, really focus on what university is going to meet those, what set of universities, what list is going to meet their learning needs.
Completely agree. An even better place to end. So I've put a link there. If anyone wants to get in contact with me or with anyone at UES, there's a link there, which is ueseducation.com/free-cool. If you want to have a chat with me about anything. Alex's email address is there if you want to talk about Rice. And of course, if anyone wants to talk to Anne, you're very welcome to drop me an email and I can pass it on. I'll filter them out, Anne. Everyone, thank you very much for listening. There are some other webinars coming up. We've got one about the digital SAT. We've got various other ones that I can't remember, but lots coming up before the end of the year. So please look at our events page for that. But for now, thank you very much, Alex, for joining. I'm glad it wasn't as early as it used to be when you were right over on the West Coast.
That's right.
And thank you very much for your time as well. And I will see you both very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.